My name is Alara, and I'm 26 years old. I'm standing on a small stage in the most expensive ballroom in the city, holding a microphone. My hand is trembling, but not from fear. It's from a rage so pure and cold, it feels like ice flowing through my veins. A few feet away, my grandfather, Arthur Vance, is beaming, accepting the applause of his sycophantic guests. He just finished his toast at my wedding reception, a public execution disguised as a celebration. He forced me to marry a man he called a nobody to teach me a lesson in humility. He said it was where I belonged. He had no idea that this very public humiliation was the final key I needed. He thought he was ending my story. In reality, he had just handed me the microphone to announce the end of his. The entire day had been an exercise in carefully crafted degradation. My grandfather had insisted on planning the whole affair, calling it his generous gift to me and my new husband Liam. But every detail was a poisoned dart. The guest list was comprised exclusively of his business partners, rivals, and the city's social elite. Not a single friend of mine was invited. My dress, which he'd had personally delivered, was a simple, off-the-rack polyester thing that looked pitifully cheap under the grand crystal chandeliers. It was a costume designed to make me look like the poor, simple girl he was casting me as. My own mother, a woman who lived and breathed for couture, wouldn't even look at me. She just kept her eyes fixed on her wine glass, her silence a sharp, painful betrayal. Have you ever been made to feel small by the very people who were supposed to build you up? Tell me your story in the comments below. It's so important we know we're not alone in these fights. And please subscribe, because you'll want to see how this particular fight ends. The ceremony itself was a blur of shame. I walked down the aisle alone. My father, when I'd asked him to walk with me, had mumbled something about not wanting to endorse this charade, the charade his own father had orchestrated. I stood at the altar next to Liam, a man I'd met only 4 times, a quiet librarian whose only crime was being a decent, unassuming person from a world that didn't involve hostile takeovers and billion-dollar trusts. He looked as lost as I felt, his rented tuxedo ill-fitting, his eyes filled with a confused kindness that almost broke my heart. He was a pawn, just like me, but at least he was an unwilling one. My family were active players in my destruction, but the true performance began at the reception. After a dinner where I could barely swallow a bite, my grandfather stood, tapping his glass for attention. The room fell silent. Arthur Vance was a man who commanded attention. He was a titan, a predator in a bespoke suit, and he had the entire room in the palm of his hand. "Friends, colleagues," he began, his voice booming with false warmth, "we are here today to celebrate a union. But more than that, we are here to celebrate a lesson in humility." His eyes, cold and gray like chips of granite, found mine across the room. "My granddaughter, Alara," he continued, a cruel smile playing on his lips, "is a brilliant young woman. So brilliant, in fact, that she began to believe the world I built was hers to command. She flew a little too close to the sun." The room was filled with soft, knowing chuckles. I could see my brother Derek, the designated heir to the Vance empire, smirking from his table. He'd always been jealous of my aptitude for business, a skill our grandfather praised in him, but condemned in me as unfeminine and overreaching. "Ambition is a fine quality in a man," Arthur went on, his speech a masterclass in public shaming. "But in a young woman, it must be tempered with the understanding of her proper place." He gestured magnanimously towards Liam, who looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "And so I found her a good, simple man. A man of the earth, someone to ground her, to show her that true value isn't found in a boardroom, but in a quiet, modest life." He raised his glass. "So I toast not to power or to wealth, but to finding your level. I've given you a life that's more your speed, Alara, a life where you can't get into trouble." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle upon me like a shroud. Then he delivered the final killing blow, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that still carried across the entire silent room. "It's where you belong." The applause was deafening. It was the sound of my own family, my own world, celebrating my confinement to a gilded cage. I felt a wave of nausea, followed by something else, a strange, terrifying calm. It was the calm of a person who has absolutely nothing left to lose. The humiliation was so complete, so absolute, that it was liberating. He thought he was putting me in my place, but all he had done was show me that my place was not, and had never been, with them. He had severed the final thread of loyalty and love I had for him. In his arrogance, he had made a fatal error. He had underestimated me, and he had done it in a room full of witnesses. This wasn't a sudden storm. It was the culmination of a lifelong weather pattern. Growing up as a Vance meant living in a world where worth was measured in stock prices and strategic alliances. From the time I was a little girl, I was fascinated by it. Not the money itself, but the game, the intricate dance of negotiation, foresight, and risk. My grandfather, Arthur, used to find it amusing. He'd let me sit in on his calls, quizzing me on market trends. When I was 10, I pointed out a flaw in a merger proposal he was reviewing, a small clause about supply chain liability that everyone else had missed. He had laughed, ruffled my hair, and called me his little shark. He saved millions because of it. For a brief, shining moment, I thought I had found my place in his world. That moment ended the day my brother Derek turned 13. Suddenly, my amusing insights became inappropriate interruptions. My questions were unbecoming. While Derek was groomed, I was to be polished. He was given books on corporate law and economics. I was given lessons in etiquette and French. He was taken on business trips to Tokyo and London. I was sent to finishing school in Switzerland. The message was clear. The throne was for him. My role was to be a valuable asset to be married off, a pretty bridge between the Vance dynasty and another powerful family. But the little shark he'd created didn't just disappear. I devoured every business journal I could get my hands on. I studied economics secretly at night, hiding my textbooks inside art history volumes. When I applied for college, I put business administration as my first choice. My application was mysteriously changed to art history before it was submitted. When I confronted my grandfather, he didn't deny it. He simply said, "A woman with your name doesn't need a business degree. She needs to cultivate taste. It will serve her better in finding a suitable husband." My parents just nodded along, my father staring at his shoes, my mother admiring a new painting on the wall. They were wholly owned subsidiaries of Arthur Vance. The real breaking point came 2 years ago. I had finished my degree in art history as commanded, but I hadn't given up. I used a small trust fund left by my grandmother, his late wife, to start a small anonymous investment portfolio. I worked under a pseudonym, Alara Grant, and offered freelance consulting services, analyzing market vulnerabilities for small firms. I was good at it, very good. One of my clients was a tech startup that Vance Consolidated, my grandfather's company, was planning to acquire. I analyzed the deal and saw it for what it was, a disaster. The startup's tech was smoke and mirrors, a house of cards ready to collapse. They had cooked their books so cleverly that Vance's top-tier due diligence team, led by my brother Derek, had missed it entirely. I was faced with a choice. Let my family's company walk into a billion-dollar mistake, which would cement Derek's incompetence and maybe, just maybe, make my grandfather see my value, or save them. My loyalty, misplaced as it was, won out. I compiled an anonymous dossier detailing every fraudulent claim and every doctored number and sent it to my grandfather's private email. The acquisition was quietly canceled. The official story was that they found unexpected market volatility. But a week later, my grandfather summoned me to his study. The anonymous dossier was sitting on his mahogany desk. He knew. I don't know how, but he knew. There was no praise in his eyes. There was no gratitude. There was only fury, a terrifying glacial rage. "You embarrassed your brother," he said, his voice dangerously low. "You embarrassed me. You went behind my back and meddled in affairs that are not your concern." "I saved the company $1 billion, I replied, my voice shaking. "Derek's team missed it. I was trying to help." "Help?" He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You think this is about helping? This is about order. It's about legacy. Derek is the future of this company. Your stunt made him look like a fool. You are to be a support, not a rival. A foundation, not the skyscraper." That was when he laid out his plan. His corrective action. He told me he had been observing a young man, a librarian named Liam. A perfectly respectable, unambitious man, my grandfather had called him. He will not fill your head with dangerous ideas. He will give you a quiet life, a simple life. You will marry him. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. He told me he would set us up in a modest suburban house. He would provide a small, conditional allowance, enough to live on, but not enough to be independent. In return, I would dissolve my consulting work, close my portfolio, and never again interfere in the world of business. "And if I refuse?" I asked, my heart pounding against my ribs. "If you refuse," he said, leaning back in his chair, the picture of absolute power, "I will cut you off. Not just from the family fortune, but from the family. Your parents will not speak to you. Your name will be removed from every trust. I will personally call every institution in this city and ensure you are never hired for anything more than serving coffee. You will be a nobody, Ilara. I made you, and I can unmake you." I looked to my parents, who were standing by the fireplace like statues. My mother finally met my gaze, but her eyes were cold. "Your grandfather knows best," she said. That was all. In that moment, I realized I was utterly alone. The injustice was absolute. This wasn't about teaching me a lesson. It was about breaking me. It was about extinguishing any spark in me that he couldn't control. So I agreed. I smiled, and I agreed to it all, because I knew, with chilling certainty, that you can't win a war by fighting on the enemy's terms. You have to build your own army in secret. And my grandfather had just given me the perfect cover, the life of a simple, forgotten woman, the life of a nobody. The 6 months between my grandfather's decree and my wedding day were the loneliest of my life, but they were also the most transformative. My decision to fight back wasn't a single event, but a slow, burning fuse that was lit in that study. The true turning point, the revelation that changed the entire game, came from the most unexpected source: Liam. Our courtship was a series of sterile, supervised meetings. We'd have coffee in hotel lobbies, my grandfather's assistant hovering nearby. Liam was quiet, polite, and seemed genuinely bewildered by the whole situation. He wasn't the oaf my family portrayed him to be. He was intelligent, well-read, and possessed a gentle dignity that stood in stark contrast to the performative arrogance of my own world. He never asked for anything, never pushed. He just seemed to be trying to survive this bizarre ordeal with his grace intact. One rainy Tuesday, about a month before the wedding, the assistant was called away for an urgent matter, leaving Liam and me alone for the first time. The silence was thick with everything unsaid. Finally, I just looked at him and said, "You don't have to go through with this. You can say no, I won't blame you." He looked down at his cup, then met my eyes. For the first time, I saw something beyond confused kindness. I saw steel. "And what would happen to my family if I did?" he asked quietly. "My mother's nursing home bills are suddenly paid in full for the next 5 years. My sister just got a scholarship to the best music conservatory in the country, all expenses covered. Your grandfather doesn't make suggestions, Miss Vance. He buys compliance." His words hit me like a physical blow. Of course. My grandfather hadn't just chosen a pawn. He had bought and paid for one, trapping an innocent family in his web to control me. The depth of his cruelty was breathtaking. "I'm so sorry, Liam," I whispered, the words feeling utterly inadequate. He gave a small, sad smile. "It's not your fault, but we're both in the same cage, aren't we?" He leaned forward slightly. "He thinks we're weak. He thinks he's put us in a position where we have no power. But he's wrong about one thing." "What's that?" I asked, hanging on his every word. "He thinks I'm a nobody," Liam said, his voice dropping. "And in his world, I am. But in my world, I have access to something he can't buy: information. I'm not just a librarian, Ilara. I'm a research archivist. Specifically, I manage the digital and physical archives for one of the oldest law firms in the city, the same law firm your grandmother, Eleanor Vance, used for all her personal affairs." I stared at him, my mind racing. My grandmother Eleanor, the one who left me the small trust fund. She had been a force of nature in her own right, a quiet counterweight to my grandfather's bluster. She had passed away when I was 16, and Arthur rarely spoke of her. "Your grandmother was a very savvy woman," Liam continued, his eyes bright with intelligence. She set up a series of firewalls and trusts long before she passed. She was worried about your grandfather's tendencies, his need for absolute control. She left behind a very specific set of instructions, locked away, documents that only become accessible under certain conditions. What conditions? I breathed, my heart hammering. One of them, he said, is your marriage, your legal union to someone outside of the families your grandfather would deem acceptable. Your marriage to a nobody, as he so elegantly puts it. It's the trigger. It was a lightning bolt, a ghost from the past reaching out to save me. My grandmother had seen this coming. She had known what her husband was capable of and had planted a seed of rebellion, a secret weapon that would only activate if he pushed me too far. This forced marriage, this ultimate act of control, was the very thing that would unlock my freedom. What do these documents say? I asked, my voice trembling with a hope I hadn't felt in years. I don't know the exact contents, Liam admitted. They're in a sealed physical vault, and the digital access keys are encrypted. But I know how to get them. The moment our marriage certificate is signed and filed, I have the legal authority, as per her instructions, to retrieve them on your behalf. Her will stipulates that the assets she controlled are to be transferred to you, but only under this specific circumstance. It seems she wanted you to be truly free of his influence before you came into your power. Suddenly, the sham wedding wasn't a punishment anymore. It was a coronation. The cheap dress, the public humiliation, the smirking faces of my family, they were all just the prelude. My grandfather thought he was writing my final chapter, but he was merely fulfilling a prophecy my grandmother had written years ago. He was unwittingly handing me the keys to the kingdom. He doesn't know, I whispered, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. He has no idea. None at all, Liam confirmed. He just sees a librarian. He doesn't see the man who knows how to navigate the catacombs of the city's legal history. He sees you as a broken princess. He doesn't see the queen waiting for her moment. In that sterile coffee shop, a pact was formed. We were no longer two pawns being sacrificed. We were allies. We were co-conspirators. The decision was made. I would walk down that aisle. I would say, I do. I would endure the toast and the pitying looks. I would play the part of the broken girl, because every moment of my humiliation was a step closer to my liberation. The wedding wasn't the end. It was the beginning of my silent ascent. The month leading up to the wedding became my war room. On the surface, I was the perfect picture of compliance. I attended fittings for the awful dress without complaint. I nodded meekly when my mother gave me patronizing advice on how to be a simple, supportive wife. I allowed my grandfather to parade me around like a cautionary tale. But beneath the placid surface, a silent, furious operation was underway. My new life as the future Mrs. Nobody was the perfect camouflage. No one was watching me. No one thought I was capable of anything. It was the most powerful I had ever been. The day after my meeting with Liam, he delivered. It wasn't the documents themselves, not yet. It was a single, password-protected file containing my grandmother's instructions and the contact information for her personal solicitor, a man named Marcus Thorne, a partner at the firm where Liam worked. The instructions were clear. Upon the legal registration of my marriage, Mr. Thorne was to execute the transfer of assets from the Eleanor Vance Blind Trust into a new holding company, established in my name. My name? Alara Grant, the pseudonym I had used for my consulting work. My grandmother had thought of everything. My first call was to Marcus Thorne. He was in his late 60s, with a voice that sounded like gravel and old leather. He remembered me as a child. "I've been waiting for this call for 10 years, Alara," he said, without any preamble. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman. She saw the chessboard more clearly than anyone. She knew Arthur would one day mistake a queen for a pawn." Over the next few weeks, Marcus and I spoke daily. He walked me through the labyrinthine structure of what my grandmother had left me. It wasn't just a pile of money. It was a weapon. She had spent the last 2 decades of her life quietly acquiring assets Arthur had overlooked or dismissed. Small tech companies with game-changing patents. Mineral rights to land he thought was worthless. And most importantly, she had been systematically buying up Vance Consolidated's corporate debt through a series of shell corporations. She owned a significant, controlling portion of the loans that kept my grandfather's empire afloat. She had built a financial siege engine, and she had just handed me the controls. While Marcus prepared the legal framework, Liam and I became a formidable team. We met in quiet corners of the city library, surrounded by the comforting smell of old paper. He was a genius at digging up information. He found the original prospectus for Vance Consolidated from 40 years ago, and in it, we found the key. My grandmother, Eleanor, had been a co-founder. Her initial investment, a massive inheritance from her own family, was equal to my grandfather's. But over the years, through a series of legal maneuvers after she had stepped back to raise her children, Arthur had diluted her stake and effectively written her out of the company's history, reframing her as just the founder's wife. The documents Liam had access to proved this. It wasn't just about money, it was about correcting history. It was about reclaiming my grandmother's legacy. My grandfather, in his arrogance, had provided me with the final piece of the puzzle. The small conditional allowance he promised me was deposited into a new bank account. It was a pittance to him, but to me, it was seed money. I didn't close my Alara Grant consulting business as he'd demanded. I supercharged it. Under the guise of planning a simple domestic life, I spent my days on encrypted video calls from the spare room of Liam's small apartment, a place no one from my family would ever dream of visiting. I used my knowledge of Vance Consolidated's inner workings, knowledge I'd been accumulating my whole life, to make a series of daring, high-risk, high-reward plays in the market. I shorted stocks I knew Derek was about to pump up with false confidence. I invested in competitors I knew were about to win contracts. Vance Consolidated was fumbling. My little trust fund, combined with the new capital, began to grow at an explosive rate. I was living a double life. In the evenings, I'd play the part of the subdued fiancé, discussing floral arrangements and color schemes with a vacant expression. My family saw what they wanted to see, a girl who had been put in her place. They had no idea that during the day, I was becoming a predator, using the very skills they had tried to suppress to dismantle their world from the inside out. The final phase of the plan was the most audacious. With the capital I had raised, and the immense financial power of my grandmother's trust, now legally mine, the moment the marriage certificate was filed, Marcus Thorne began the attack. We didn't just buy more debt. We started a hostile takeover bid. We used a foreign investment fund as a proxy, a corporate raider with a reputation for ruthless efficiency. No one knew it was me. To the world, it was just a shark smelling blood in the water, targeting a venerable but slightly vulnerable giant. My grandfather was rattled. I heard the whispers at our tense family dinners. He was furious, spending all his time in crisis meetings trying to figure out who was behind the attack. He and Derek were scrambling, trying to shore up their defenses, completely oblivious that the architect of their doom was sitting across the table from them, quietly asking them to pass the salt. By the morning of my wedding, we had secured a controlling interest, not just of the debt, but of the company's voting shares. The final transaction had cleared just hours before I put on that cheap polyester dress. Vance Consolidated was mine. The company my grandmother had co-founded and my grandfather had stolen was now under my control. All that was left was the announcement, and Arthur, in his infinite hubris, was about to provide me with the perfect stage, the perfect audience, and the microphone to do it. He thought he was officiating my surrender. He was, in fact, emceeing his own downfall. As the applause for my grandfather's toast died down, the silence stretched, thick and expectant. He remained on the small stage, basking in the glow of his own perceived victory, that smug, proprietary smile fixed on his face. He gestured for me to join him, a final flourish to his performance. "And now, a few words from the happy bride herself," he announced, his tone dripping with condescension. "I'm sure Alara would like to thank us for this opportunity." I felt Liam's hand briefly squeeze mine under the table, a silent signal of support. I stood up, my legs steady, the cheap polyester of my dress rustling softly. I walked towards the stage, my eyes locked on my grandfather. Every person in that room, the titans of industry, the social vultures, my own complicit family, watched me. They expected tears. They expected a broken, quiet thank you. They expected surrender. I was about to give them a revolution. I took the microphone from his hand. His skin was dry and cool. The microphone felt heavy, solid, a scepter. I turned to face the crowd, letting my gaze sweep over them. I saw my brother Derek raising his champagne glass in a mocking salute. I saw my mother, finally looking at me, a flicker of something, pity, regret, in her eyes before it was extinguished. I saw my father, staring intently at the floral centerpiece on his table. "Thank you, grandfather," I began, my voice clear and ringing, carrying to every corner of the grand ballroom. A hush fell. This was not the timid whisper they were anticipating. "Thank you for this beautiful and very public celebration. You've always taught me that the right venue is everything, and you've gathered here tonight everyone who needs to hear my announcement." I saw a flicker of confusion on Arthur's face. This was not in his script. He started to move towards me, to take back the microphone, but I turned slightly, putting my body between him and the mic stand. "My grandfather spoke of lessons," I continued, my voice gaining strength with every word. "And he is right. I have learned a great deal. I learned that ambition is not a flaw to be corrected, but a fire to be fed. I learned that being underestimated is the greatest strategic advantage one can possibly have. And I learned that legacy is a funny thing. Sometimes, the people who build it aren't the ones whose names are on the building." I turned my head to look directly at him now. The confusion on his face was hardening into anger. The air crackled with tension. The guests were leaning forward, sensing that the evening's entertainment was about to take an unexpected turn. "You see, my grandfather mentioned he was concerned about the company being under attack by a hostile entity," I said, addressing the room again. "He spent weeks trying to unmask the mysterious foreign fund that has been buying up Vance Consolidated's debt and shares. He's been holding emergency meetings, trying to fend off this corporate raider." I paused, letting the drama build. I could see Derek's smirk had vanished, replaced by a dawning look of horror. He was smart enough to be putting the pieces together, and he did not like the picture they were forming. "Well, grandfather," I said, turning back to him, my voice dropping to a conversational, almost gentle tone that was somehow more brutal than shouting. "You can call off the search. The raider is no longer at the gates. She is in the throne room." I let that hang in the air for a beat. The silence was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. As of 9:15 this morning, a holding company named Grant Enterprises, of which I am the sole proprietor, completed its acquisition of a 51% controlling interest in Vance Consolidated. A collective gasp swept through the room. It was a physical wave of sound. My grandfather's face went from ruddy anger to a ghastly, bloodless white. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked like a statue cracking from the inside. "It turns out," I went on, my voice now laced with the ice I'd been feeling all day, "that being married off to a nobody has its perks. This marriage, this act of supreme control, was the very trigger my grandmother, Eleanor Vance, the co-founder of this company, whose name you erased from its history, put in her will to unlock her true legacy for me. The legacy you stole from her." I held up my left hand, the simple gold band on my finger glinting under the lights. "This marriage certificate gave me access to the capital. My own business acumen, the very thing you tried to beat out of me, did the rest. You were so busy watching the front door for an enemy army, you never thought to check if the queen was already inside the castle, dismantling it stone by stone." I turned to my brother, Derek. "You're fired, Derek. Your incompetence has been a liability for far too long. Security will escort you out." Derek shot up from his chair, his face purple with rage, but two large men in dark suits, my own private security I'd hired for the event, were already moving towards his table. Then I faced my parents. "Mother, father, you chose your side. You stood by and watched him try to destroy me. Your allowances are cut. Your access is revoked. You will have to learn to live without the Vance name propping you up. Perhaps you'll finally learn what you're worth on your own." My mother let out a small, strangled sob. Finally, I turned back to the man of the hour, my grandfather. He looked small now, defeated. The Titan had crumbled. "You said this is where I belong," I said, my voice soft again. I took a step closer to him, the microphone still in my hand. "You were right. I belong right here. at the head of the company my grandmother built and I just bought. As for you, Arthur, you will be allowed to retire with a modest pension. A simple life, a quiet life. It's a life that's more your speed now, a life where you can't get into trouble. I used his own words, twisting the knife he had tried to plunge into me. I saw the last bit of fight go out of his eyes, replaced by the hollow emptiness of total defeat. I placed the microphone back on the stand with a soft click. I looked out at the stunned faces of his world, now my world. Then I walked off the stage, past my grandfather's frozen form, and took the hand of my husband, Liam. Not a nobody, my partner, my ally, my kingmaker. The silence in the ballroom broke, not with a bang, but with 1,000 frantic whispers. My speech had detonated a bomb in the center of their universe, and now the fallout was beginning. Liam and I didn't stay to watch the chaos unfold. We simply walked, hand in hand, through the stunned crowd. People parted for us as if we were royalty, their faces a mixture of shock, fear, and a grudging, newfound respect. I didn't look back at my family. The severing was complete. The past was a foreign country, and I had just renounced my citizenship. The days that followed were a blur of intense, satisfying work. The first order of business was an emergency board meeting. I walked into the Vance Consolidated boardroom, the same room where I'd been told my opinions were unbecoming, and took the seat at the head of the table. The remaining board members, men who had known me my entire life and had patted my head as a child, looked at me with a terror I found deeply gratifying. There was no argument, no resistance. Power respects power, and I now held all of it. My grandfather was true to his new, diminished stature. He signed the retirement papers Marcus Thorne put in front of him without a word. The Titan was gone, replaced by a stooped old man with haunted eyes. I heard through the grapevine that he moved into a small condo by the coast, a place far from the city's pulse. He had been unmade, just as he had threatened to do to me. The irony was poetic. My brother Derek did not go quietly. He tried to sue, claiming I had used undue influence and that my grandfather was not of sound mind. It was a pathetic, desperate move. Marcus Thorne shut it down in less than a week, presenting the meticulously documented history of my grandfather's own financial and emotional abuse, along with proof of Derek's own gross incompetence that had cost the company millions over the years. The lawsuit was dropped, and Derek vanished from the social scene, his reputation in tatters. My parents attempted a different tactic. A week after the wedding, my mother called me, her voice thick with manufactured warmth. She spoke of forgiveness, of family ties, of letting bygones be bygones. She invited me and Liam to dinner. I let her talk. Then I calmly explained that our relationship was now purely transactional. If they wished to have any kind of future that involved financial stability, it would be on my terms, which would begin with a public written apology to both me and Liam for their complicity. They refused. The phone calls stopped. For the first time in my life, the silence from them felt like peace, not punishment. My victory wasn't just about punishment, though. It was about restoration. My first major act as CEO was to officially change the company's public name to Vance & Grant Consolidated, putting my grandmother's name, Eleanor Grant Vance, back where it belonged. We issued a press release detailing her role as a co-founder and her foundational investment, complete with copies of the original documents Liam had unearthed. We restored her legacy, and in doing so, I felt like I was finally honoring the woman who had saved me from beyond the grave. And then there was Liam. Our marriage, born of a tyrant's scheme, began to transform into something real. In the quiet moments after the storm, we started to actually get to know each other. We discovered a shared love for old movies, a similar dry wit, and a deep, mutual respect. He wasn't just my ally. He was my partner in every sense of the word. He had no interest in the corporate world, which I loved. He grounded me. He celebrated my victories without wanting any of the credit. He was the safe harbor I had never known. The modest suburban house my grandfather had picked out for us as a prison. We moved in. We filled it with books and laughter and the smell of real food cooking in the kitchen. It became our sanctuary, a symbol of our freedom, not our confinement. I was finally free. Not just financially free, but free from the crushing weight of my family's expectations and their toxic definition of my worth. I was no longer the disappointing granddaughter or the overreaching woman. I was Alara Grant, CEO, a wife, a woman who had been sent to the bottom, only to discover that the foundation of a new world was waiting for her there. The power I now wielded was not just the power to buy and sell companies. It was the power to define my own life, to write my own story, to decide for myself exactly where I belong. And I belonged right here, in this life I had built from the ashes of the one they had tried to burn down. Looking back, the most ironic part of my grandfather's plan is that, in a way, he succeeded. He wanted to teach me a lesson about my proper place, and I learned it. My place wasn't where he thought it was, in the shadow of a powerful man, but at the head of my own table, on my own terms. He wanted to show me the value of a simple life, and I found it, not in the absence of ambition, but in the quiet, unwavering support of a partner who values me for who I am, not what I can do for him. He wanted me to marry a nobody, and in doing so, he introduced me to the one person who held the key to everything. This journey taught me that true power isn't about control over others. It's about control over yourself. It's the resilience to get back up after being knocked down, the intelligence to see an opportunity where others see only a setback, and the courage to demand what you are worth. My family saw my ambition as a threat because they measured worth by a rigid, outdated hierarchy. They couldn't comprehend that a woman could build an empire, so they tried to shrink me down to fit into their small world. Their biggest mistake was thinking their cage was strong enough to hold me. What I took from them wasn't just a company, it was my own narrative. For 26 years, they wrote my story for me. They cast me as the lesser child, the difficult woman, the cautionary tale. The moment I took that microphone, I became the author. I decided who the heroes and villains were. I decided how the story ends. And the best part? The story isn't over. This is just the beginning. I'm not just rebuilding a company. I'm creating a new legacy, one built on merit, integrity, and the fundamental belief that talent has no gender. A legacy my grandmother would be proud of. If you've watched this far, thank you. My story is proof that even when you feel completely powerless, there is always a move to be made. Sometimes, the greatest victories come from being so thoroughly underestimated that no one sees you coming. If this story of reclaiming power resonated with you, please hit the like button so that others who might be feeling trapped can find it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice and empowerment. Remember, never let anyone else tell you where you belong. You define your own place in this world, Lace.